The early years of World War II were defined by the shadow of German might stretching across the Atlantic. The Kriegsmarine, with its fleet of U-boats, had turned the ocean into a deadly theater. Hitler, observing from his strategic vantage, mocked the Allied powers, especially the United States, which he saw as untested and unprepared. To him, the American Navy was a distant, inexperienced force, incapable of projecting power across the stormy seas. He believed that their industrial capacity, though considerable on paper, would falter under the pressures of total war, and that the Atlantic, with its vast expanses and treacherous waters, was a domain Germany had already claimed. In 1939 and 1940, the U-boats prowled with terrifying effectiveness. British convoys, carrying essential supplies to sustain the embattled island nation, were relentlessly attacked. Every sinking was both a physical and psychological blow. Ships disappeared beneath the waves with shocking regularity, and with each loss, Britain's vulnerability became increasingly apparent. Hitler observed these losses with satisfaction, confident that the Allies lacked the means to replace the vessels quickly enough. America, in particular, seemed distant from the immediate struggle, a nation still caught in the inertia of peacetime economy and complacency. Yet, beneath the surface of his underestimation, a monumental shift was taking shape. The United States, though untested in naval combat, had a hidden strength that Hitler could not see: the power of American industry. Roosevelt, recognizing the existential threat posed by Nazi Germany, embarked on a plan to mobilize the nation's factories and shipyards into an unstoppable engine of production. It was a plan not to confront the Kriegsmarine directly, but to outproduce it, to flood the seas with ships faster than they could be destroyed. The solution came in the form of the Liberty ships. These vessels were designed with one purpose in mind: efficiency and speed of construction. They were not elegant. They were not technologically advanced marvels of naval engineering. But each Liberty ship could be built rapidly, using modular construction techniques that allowed different sections to be fabricated simultaneously and then welded together with unprecedented speed. What might have taken a year could now be accomplished in 2 months, and as techniques improved, even faster. The United States had discovered a simple yet profound truth: quantity, when delivered with precision and consistency, could become a weapon as formidable as any battleship or submarine. Shipyards across the country became the beating heart of this transformation. Men and women poured into the work, driven not only by patriotic duty, but also by the sheer urgency of the moment. Steel and rivets became the language of war, and each completed ship was a testament to the nation's resolve. The Liberty ships, though humble in design, carried everything essential to the Allied effort: food, ammunition, vehicles, medical supplies, and eventually, troops. Every ship launched was a message to Hitler that his mockery of the American Navy was premature, that he had underestimated not the skill of American sailors, but the determination of the nation itself. The German High Command could not fail to notice the impact. By 1943, the numbers spoke for themselves. U-boats, which had once dominated the Atlantic, found themselves outpaced. For every ship they sank, two more seemed to appear in its place. The Allied supply lines stabilized, and the strategic advantage in the Atlantic began to shift. Hitler, whose confidence had been rooted in underestimating the United States, watched as the Liberty ships became a lifeline not only for Britain, but for the broader Allied war effort. The Atlantic, once seen as Germany's playground, was being reclaimed by sheer production, perseverance, and the indomitable spirit of a people united behind a common cause. Life aboard the Liberty ships was perilous. The vessels were not heavily armed, and their crews faced constant threats from U-boats, stormy seas, and the ever-present risk of torpedo attacks. Yet, the men and women who built and sailed these ships embraced the danger. Each mission carried the knowledge that their work had direct consequences for the survival of nations and the outcome of the war. Despite the risks, the Liberty ships kept coming, each one a testament to human ingenuity and resilience under pressure. The American Navy, once the subject of scorn, became a symbol of unyielding determination, proving that warfare was not only a contest of firepower, but also of resources, coordination, and unrelenting effort. Hitler's miscalculation was profound. In mocking the American Navy, he had failed to recognize that industrial might, when harnessed with purpose, could compensate for any deficiency in tactical experience. The Liberty ships were emblematic of a new kind of warfare, where production lines became as crucial as battleships, and assembly lines held the power to shape the destiny of continents. Each ship launched into the Atlantic carried with it hope, sustenance, and the quiet defiance of a nation that refused to yield to intimidation or mockery. The transformation was not only quantitative but also qualitative. Shipyards became hubs of social change, drawing in workers from diverse backgrounds, including women and African Americans, who had previously been excluded from such labor. The war effort became a catalyst for social upheaval and integration, proving that the fight against tyranny could inspire change on multiple fronts. The Liberty ships were more than vessels of steel. They were vessels of societal transformation, carrying the promise of equality and shared purpose alongside crates of vital supplies. The relentless production of Liberty ships reshaped the very dynamics of the Atlantic War. As the vessels multiplied, convoys grew larger, and the once feared U-boats faced a new reality. The ocean was no longer a domain they could dominate. For every ship they managed to sink, 2 or 3 more would arrive to take its place, carrying supplies that would sustain armies, rebuild cities, and fuel the Allied advance. What had begun as a struggle for survival had transformed into a war of endurance, where industrial capacity became a decisive weapon. Across the shipyards, the rhythm of production never ceased. Day and night, men and women worked under grueling conditions, welding, riveting, and assembling. The work was repetitive, dangerous, and exhausting, yet it was imbued with a sense of purpose. Each ship that slid into the water was a triumph over the enemy's intimidation, a tangible representation of American resilience. The Liberty ships, unadorned and utilitarian, became symbols of a new kind of power, one rooted not in speed, strategy, or intimidation, but in unyielding determination and coordinated effort. For the crews who sailed these ships, the reality was immediate and perilous. Liberty ships were lightly armed and relied on convoy protection for safety. Every voyage across the Atlantic was fraught with danger. U-boats lurked beneath the waves, ready to strike with torpedoes that could split a ship in seconds. Storms lashed the hulls, and frigid waters threatened the lives of sailors. Yet despite the ever-present dangers, morale remained remarkably high. There was a shared understanding among the crews. The mission was greater than any individual, and failure was not an option. Each ship carried not just cargo, but hope, determination, and the lifeblood of the Allied war effort. The Liberty ships' crews were often ordinary men and women thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Many had no prior experience at sea. Some were young men drafted into service, others seasoned sailors returning from earlier assignments. They learned quickly that the success of a mission depended on teamwork, courage, and the willingness to endure hardship. Stories emerged of sailors repairing torpedo damage mid-voyage, of men risking their lives to save colleagues trapped in flooded compartments, and of crews maintaining composure under relentless attack. In the face of danger, the Liberty ships became floating communities of resilience. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the German high command struggled to adapt. Hitler's confidence in his U-boat fleet had been rooted in a profound underestimation of American industry. The initial successes of the Kriegsmarine, which had seemed unstoppable, were now being offset by the sheer volume of replacement ships being launched from U.S. shipyards. Tactical ingenuity alone could no longer sustain the offensive. The Atlantic, which had once been a theater where a few dozen submarines could dictate the flow of supplies, was now a battleground in which overwhelming numbers and relentless production determined the outcome. By mid-1943, the shift was undeniable. Convoys, once fragmented and vulnerable, became formidable. Escort ships, armed with depth charges and sonar detection, increasingly thwarted U-boat attacks. The Liberty ships, arriving in ever-growing numbers, ensured that supply lines remained intact. The balance of power in the Atlantic had begun to tilt decisively in favor of the Allies. Hitler, whose mockery of the American Navy had been both derisive and dismissive, could not reconcile his expectation with the stark reality unfolding before him. The impact of the Liberty ships extended far beyond the tactical level. Each ship contributed to the strategic sustainability of Allied forces in multiple theaters of war. Ammunition, vehicles, fuel, and rations flowed steadily to Europe and North Africa, sustaining campaigns that might otherwise have faltered. The ability to deliver troops and supplies reliably reshaped operational planning, allowing Allied commanders to undertake offensives with a level of logistical confidence that had previously been impossible. The war, once dominated by the threat of attrition, was now increasingly influenced by the capacity to supply, reinforce, and adapt. The Liberty ships were at the heart of this transformation. The story of these ships was also the story of American ingenuity. Engineers, planners, and laborers devised techniques that had never been attempted on such a scale. Prefabricated sections allowed disparate teams to work simultaneously, drastically reducing construction time. Innovations in welding, rather than traditional riveting, sped production and improved efficiency. The workforce, drawn from across the country and across social boundaries, became a microcosm of American society united against a common threat. Women, previously excluded from heavy industrial labor, took their place on assembly lines. African Americans, long denied access to skilled trades, were trained and integrated into essential production roles. The Liberty ships were not merely machines of war. They were catalysts for social transformation. Despite the success, challenges remained. Early Liberty ships experienced structural issues, with some vessels suffering hull fractures in rough seas. Yet these setbacks were met with rapid engineering responses, design adjustments, and improved quality control. Every difficulty encountered was an opportunity for learning, a testament to the adaptive power of American industry. Where Hitler had mocked and expected weakness, he found resilience, ingenuity, and relentless problem-solving. The psychological dimension of the Liberty ships' production cannot be overstated. They served as a tangible rebuke to Hitler's assumptions, demonstrating that industrial capacity and national will could counteract even the most fearsome military technologies. The Atlantic, once a theater dominated by stealth, aggression, and destruction, became a space where sheer determination and coordinated effort could prevail. The United States, initially underestimated, had revealed a profound truth. In total war, the ability to produce relentlessly and sustain an effort across vast distances can outweigh even the deadliest weapons. By the end of 1943, the effect was clear. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had begun as a perilous struggle for survival, was now turning decisively in favor of the Allies. Convoys became more secure, losses were mitigated, and the logistical foundation for major offensives, such as the Normandy invasion, was firmly in place. Liberty ships, once derided as unsophisticated and unglamorous, had proven themselves indispensable. Hitler's mockery of the American Navy, once so confident and dismissive, now echoed against the reality of an industrial juggernaut that could not be stalled. The crews of the Liberty ships continued to sail into danger with unwavering commitment. Each voyage reinforced the vital lesson that courage and perseverance, combined with innovation and production, could overcome even the gravest threats. The Atlantic had become a theater where the interplay of human determination, technological adaptation, and industrial might define success. And it was the Liberty ships, humble yet unstoppable, that carried this transformation across the waves. As 1944 approached, the Liberty ships had firmly established themselves as the lifeblood of the Allied war effort. Each ship, though simple in design, carried immense responsibility. Ammunition for the front lines, tanks for armored divisions, food to sustain millions, and medical supplies for the wounded, all moved across the Atlantic aboard these vessels. They had become the arteries of a global war, ensuring that Allied operations could continue even in the face of relentless enemy attacks. Hitler's underestimation of American resolve had become a glaring strategic error, one whose consequences would reverberate throughout the remainder of the conflict. The story of the Liberty ships was as much about the people who built and sailed them as it was about steel and rivets. Shipyard workers endured exhausting shifts in sweltering or freezing conditions, often working 7 days a week. Their labor was meticulous and repetitive, yet each task carried the weight of enormous stakes. For these men and women, the ships represented more than cargo. They were the embodiment of a nation's determination to resist tyranny and to sustain those fighting on the front lines. In the spaces between welding seams and riveted plates, one could sense a collective commitment, a shared understanding that every completed vessel contributed directly to the survival and eventual victory of the Allied forces. Sailors, in turn, faced dangers that tested courage, skill, and endurance. Crossing the Atlantic was a perilous journey. U-boats lurked beneath the waves, using stealth and surprise to devastate unprepared convoys. Storms battered the ships, often at the very moments when enemy attack seemed imminent. Freezing waters, relentless fatigue, and the ever-present possibility of being torpedoed made life aboard a Liberty ship a continuous test of resilience. Yet, sailors endured, motivated not only by duty but by the knowledge that their voyages had real consequences. The successful delivery of cargo meant that soldiers could fight, civilians could survive, and entire nations could hold their ground against aggression. The German U-boat campaign, once so dominant, began to falter. Allied convoys grew stronger, more coordinated, and better protected. Escort ships armed with depth charges, sonar detection, and air support significantly reduced losses. The Liberty ships, arriving in growing numbers, ensured that supply lines remained intact despite enemy efforts. Every ship that reached its destination represented a strategic victory, a blow to German morale, and a clear indicator that the tide of the Atlantic was shifting. Hitler's confidence, rooted in mocking American inefficiency, was being steadily undermined by an industrial and logistical reality that he could neither fully comprehend nor counter. The Liberty ship's design, though utilitarian, reflected a profound understanding of modern warfare's demands. Speed of construction was prioritized over aesthetics or advanced technological features. Prefabricated sections allowed parallel assembly, dramatically reducing build times. Welding replaced traditional riveting in many cases, improving efficiency without sacrificing structural integrity. Problems with brittle steel were addressed swiftly, demonstrating a capacity for rapid adaptation that became a hallmark of American industrial strategy. Each ship launched was not only a functional vessel, but also a testament to human ingenuity and problem-solving under pressure. Social transformation accompanied the Industrial Revolution. Women, who had previously been excluded from heavy industrial labor, became essential contributors to shipbuilding efforts. African Americans, historically barred from skilled industrial positions, gained access to training programs and employment opportunities. The shipyards became spaces where traditional societal barriers were challenged and often broken down, as the urgency of war necessitated inclusion and collaboration. The Liberty ships were thus more than instruments of logistical support. They were symbols of societal adaptation, unity, and collective purpose. Across the Atlantic, the strategic consequences were profound. The capacity to replace ships faster than they could be sunk rendered Germany's U-boat campaign increasingly ineffective. Allied operations, once constrained by vulnerability to supply disruption, now proceeded with renewed confidence. Military planners could coordinate large-scale invasions, redeploy troops, and sustain campaigns without the constant fear that a lack of logistical support would doom their efforts. The Liberty ships, in essence, had transformed the operational environment of the Atlantic, converting what had been a theater of desperation into one of strategic advantage. Hitler's miscalculation was not merely tactical, but psychological. By mocking the American Navy, he underestimated the broader capabilities of the United States, particularly its industrial resilience and organizational capacity. The Liberty ships embodied this oversight. They demonstrated that in total war, the ability to mobilize, produce, and sustain operations across great distances could outweigh localized technological superiority or tactical cunning. Each ship that crossed the ocean was a rebuke to the notion that naval prowess alone could determine outcomes, and a vivid illustration of how industrial and societal cohesion could rewrite the rules of engagement. As the war progressed, the Liberty ships' impact became increasingly visible. They supplied not only Europe but also North Africa, supporting campaigns against Axis forces on multiple fronts. The steady flow of material allowed Allied forces to maintain pressure, forcing Germany to divide resources and attention across theaters. Operational flexibility, enabled by reliable logistics, became a decisive factor in planning and executing offensives. The Liberty ships, humble and unassuming, had become enablers of strategy, turning the tide of the Atlantic into a story of endurance, adaptability, and relentless production. By late 1944, the psychological impact on Germany was unmistakable. U-boat crews, once confident in their dominance, faced convoys reinforced with greater numbers, better protection, and an unceasing stream of replacement ships. Hitler's derision of the American Navy had been replaced by frustration and disbelief. The Atlantic, which had initially seemed a clear path to undermine Britain and challenge the Allies, had become a contested space where the industrial might of the United States imposed itself as an unyielding force. The Liberty ships, once mocked for their simplicity, had become a linchpin of Allied success. The human stories aboard the Liberty ships were as compelling as the statistics of their production. Every voyage across the Atlantic was a journey into danger, a test of endurance, and a testament to courage. Sailors faced U-boat attacks with limited means of defense, navigating treacherous waters under the constant threat of torpedoes. Storms would lash the ships, sending waves crashing over decks, freezing wind cutting through clothing and skin. Despite these challenges, crews developed a rhythm, a way to endure the monotony and terror of life at sea. They repaired engines mid-voyage, tended to wounded comrades, and maintained the ship's operations with discipline and determination. These vessels were more than floating cargo carriers. They were arenas in which ordinary individuals confronted extraordinary adversity and often emerged resilient. The stories of the men aboard were varied, yet shared a common thread of perseverance. Young sailors who had never seen the ocean learned quickly to navigate the dangerous currents of the Atlantic. Seasoned mariners shared knowledge and experience, mentoring new recruits and fostering a sense of unity. When ships were struck by torpedoes, crew members would work tirelessly to save their vessel, bailing water, patching holes, and keeping engines running. In countless instances, the bravery of these sailors turned what might have been a catastrophic loss into a successful delivery of cargo. The Liberty ships, in their simplicity, had become crucibles in which courage and human ingenuity were forged under fire. Meanwhile, the industrial might behind these ships continued to grow. Shipyards expanded rapidly, employing tens of thousands of workers, many of whom had never been involved in shipbuilding. Women filled roles in welding, riveting, and assembly, while African Americans, long excluded from skilled trades, gained training and employment opportunities. The Liberty Ship program became a microcosm of broader social change, demonstrating the transformative power of necessity and the ability of a nation under threat to mobilize its entire population. In these factories, the American workforce found purpose, community, and a shared mission that transcended individual backgrounds and social divisions. The strategic consequences of these ships were undeniable. As more Liberty ships launched, the Allies gained a logistical edge that could not be ignored. Supplies flowed steadily to embattled fronts, ensuring that operations could proceed despite the ongoing threat of enemy action. Troop movements became more predictable and reliable, allowing for complex offensives and sustained campaigns. Germany's U-boats, once dominant, now found themselves in a struggle of attrition against numbers they could not overcome. Each ship that successfully crossed the Atlantic weakened the enemy's confidence and bolstered the morale of Allied forces. The tide of war, once perilous and uncertain, began to shift decisively in favor of the Allies. The psychological impact of the Liberty ships extended beyond the battlefield. Hitler, who had mocked the American Navy and dismissed the United States as unprepared, faced the stark reality of a nation whose industrial capacity was unmatched. The simple cargo ships, once considered unremarkable, had become symbols of American resolve. They demonstrated that technological sophistication alone could not determine outcomes. Sheer production, coordination, and the commitment of a population could redefine strategic possibilities. The Atlantic was no longer a theater dominated by fear and uncertainty. It had become a proving ground for the extraordinary ability of a nation to respond to threat with speed, scale, and effectiveness. By 1945, the cumulative effect of the Liberty ships was clear. Allied supply lines were secure, campaigns proceeded with confidence, and the operational flexibility of forces across Europe and North Africa had increased dramatically. Every ship launched reinforced a system of logistics that Germany could not match. Hitler's initial disdain for the American Navy had blinded him to the critical importance of industrial power, and the Liberty ships were living proof of this oversight. They had changed the dynamics of naval warfare, turning the Atlantic from a theater of peril into a corridor of sustenance, support, and ultimately, victory. The human cost of this effort was immense. Sailors lost their lives, ships were destroyed, and workers endured long hours under hazardous conditions. Yet, each sacrifice contributed to a larger purpose. The Liberty ships were vessels of endurance, courage, and determination. They were instruments through which ordinary people exerted extraordinary influence over the course of global events. Their story is one not only of steel and logistics, but of human resilience, of collective effort transforming what seemed impossible into reality. Even as the war drew to a close, the legacy of the Liberty ships endured. They became a symbol of industrial ingenuity, of a nation capable of mobilizing its resources on an unprecedented scale. They demonstrated that logistical capacity, combined with social cohesion and human determination, could turn the tide against formidable foes. The Atlantic, once a domain of fear, had been reclaimed through relentless production, courage, and innovation. Hitler's mockery, once confident and derisive, had been silenced by the unstoppable force of a nation committed to victory. As 1945 progressed, the significance of the Liberty ships became undeniable across all theaters of war. The scale of production had reached a point where the loss of any single vessel could no longer threaten the Allied supply chain. These ships had become a rolling testament to the power of industrial organization and national will. Convoys crossed the Atlantic with an ever-growing sense of security, supported by improved escort strategies, better communication systems, and air cover. The ocean, once a perilous expanse where German U-boats struck with deadly precision, had been transformed into a highway of hope, carrying everything essential to sustaining the fight against tyranny. The Liberty ships had also fostered a sense of shared responsibility and contribution. For the crews, each successful voyage was a triumph over the unseen adversary lurking beneath the waves. Sailors endured freezing temperatures, violent storms, and the constant threat of enemy attack. Yet the mission remained clear: deliver the cargo, no matter the cost. Their bravery and perseverance became the backbone of the Atlantic supply line, a reminder that the machinery of war was only as effective as the people who operated it. Each ship that completed its journey reinforced the connection between industrial might and human courage, demonstrating that victory was forged not just in factories or shipyards, but also in the hearts and minds of those willing to face peril on the high seas. For the workforce behind the ships, there was a profound sense of purpose. Shipyards buzzed with activity around the clock, producing vessels at rates previously unimaginable. Women, young men, and minority workers were integrated into roles critical to the war effort, breaking down long-standing barriers and challenging societal norms. The Liberty Ship program became a reflection of a society united by necessity, where the collective effort of ordinary citizens could have extraordinary impact. In welding rooms and assembly lines, people understood that their labor could alter the course of history, turning the tide against an enemy who had underestimated them so profoundly. Strategically, the Liberty ships allowed the Allies to expand their operations in ways previously thought impossible. Supplies could reach remote fronts, reinforcements could be delivered in large numbers, and operations could be sustained over extended periods without the constant threat of logistical collapse. Germany's U-boats, once considered the ultimate weapon of disruption, were rendered increasingly ineffective in the face of relentless production. The strategic advantage had shifted decisively, and Hitler's miscalculation had created a gap that could not be closed. The Atlantic was no longer a domain of fear and uncertainty. It was a corridor of strength and assurance for the Allied forces. The psychological ramifications for Germany were profound. Hitler's initial disdain for the American Navy had been rooted in a belief that industrial limitations and inexperience would hinder the United States. The reality of Liberty ship production, however, revealed a capability far beyond his expectations. Each ship launched, each convoy that arrived safely, was a silent rebuke to the assumptions that had guided German strategy. The Atlantic Campaign, which had once instilled fear and confidence in Germany's favor, now showcased the power of American determination, industrial coordination, and adaptive strategy. Hitler's mockery, once scornful and dismissive, had been overtaken by the harsh reality of a nation mobilized to an unprecedented degree. The human stories continued to shape the narrative. Sailors aboard Liberty ships faced extraordinary challenges, including rough seas, mechanical failures, and the constant threat of enemy engagement. Yet their determination never wavered. Crews learned to work in harmony, improvising solutions to critical problems, supporting one another, and ensuring the mission's success. Shipbuilders, on land, took pride in seeing their efforts materialize in ships that would sail into danger yet return with valuable cargo intact. The interplay of industrial ingenuity and human courage became a defining feature of the Atlantic War, illustrating that victory was as much about perseverance and adaptability as it was about tactics and firepower. By mid-1945, the cumulative effect of the Liberty ships was evident in the broader context of the war. Allied forces had secured the Atlantic, enabling operations such as the D-Day invasion and subsequent campaigns across Europe to proceed with reliable logistics. The ability to move vast quantities of supplies, equipment, and troops had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. Germany's naval capabilities, once a formidable threat, could no longer dictate the tempo of war. The Liberty ships, simple yet indispensable, had created a logistical superiority that transformed the operational possibilities for the Allies, proving that the outcome of global conflict could hinge as much on industrial resilience as on battlefield tactics. The legacy of the Liberty ships extended beyond the immediate context of World War II. They demonstrated the profound potential of industrial mobilization, showing that a nation's collective effort could overcome even the most fearsome military threats. They also revealed the importance of adaptability, innovation, and the ability to learn from challenges quickly. Problems such as brittle hulls or construction errors were met with rapid solutions, demonstrating the effectiveness of responsive engineering and coordinated management. In every sense, the Liberty ships exemplified a model of total war in which industrial production, social cohesion, and human courage converged to produce extraordinary results. Even after the war, the story of the Liberty ships continued to resonate. They became symbols of a period when ordinary citizens and sailors alike contributed directly to the outcome of a global conflict. They represented the triumph of determination over intimidation, of numbers and persistence over tactical brilliance alone. Hitler's mockery, once confident and derisive, had been silenced by the unrelenting output of shipyards, the courage of sailors, and the resilience of a nation united against tyranny. The Atlantic had been transformed, and with it, the trajectory of the war itself. The conclusion of the Atlantic Campaign and the final stages of World War II made the importance of the Liberty ships undeniable. They were no longer just vessels of steel and rivets. They were symbols of national resolve, embodiments of industrial power, and testaments to human courage. The relentless production, the perseverance of the crews, and the coordination of a nation had created a force that could not be stopped by mockery, doubt, or even the deadliest enemy weapons. Hitler's underestimation of the United States had set the stage for one of the most decisive shifts of the war. Where he had anticipated weakness, he encountered a relentless, organized, and determined adversary. The Liberty ships had done more than just supply material for the front lines. They had redefined the strategic possibilities of modern warfare. Convoys moved with unprecedented reliability, enabling commanders to plan complex operations with confidence. Troop movements, reinforcement schedules, and supply distribution all depended on the unbroken chain of ships crossing the Atlantic. The vessels had become the arteries of victory, carrying not only the necessities of war, but also the proof that determination, organization, and industrial strength could counter even the most sophisticated military threats. Sailors, shipbuilders, and planners alike understood the broader significance of their work. For the crews at sea, every successful voyage was a victory against adversity, a tangible accomplishment that contributed to the survival of nations and the eventual defeat of tyranny. For the workers on land, each completed ship represented a direct intervention in global events, an assertion that a nation united by purpose could achieve the seemingly impossible. Liberty ships were a fusion of human will and industrial capacity, a combination that proved decisive in the outcome of the war. The transformation wrought by these vessels extended beyond the military and industrial spheres. The Liberty ship program accelerated social change, challenging traditional gender roles, racial barriers, and societal expectations. Women in factories took on roles once considered impossible for them, and African Americans gained access to skilled labor opportunities previously denied. The shipyards became arenas where necessity drove progress, where the urgency of survival created conditions for social innovation. In the process, the Liberty ships became not only instruments of war, but also symbols of societal transformation, demonstrating that collective effort could reshape not just the battlefield, but the society that waged the war. Strategically, the Liberty ship's influence was evident in every major Allied operation in the final years of the war. Normandy, the liberation of France, the campaigns in Italy, and the push into Germany all depended on the steady flow of supplies that these vessels provided. The ability to sustain large-scale operations over time and distance redefined what was possible in military planning. Where once the threat of logistical collapse constrained ambition, the Liberty ships ensured that the Allied forces could strike with confidence, knowing that reinforcements, ammunition, and provisions would arrive. The Atlantic had been transformed from a theater of fear into a corridor of opportunity, and the United States had proven that industrial might could be as decisive as any fleet of battleships or squadron of fighter planes. The psychological impact on Germany and its leaders was equally profound. Hitler's initial disdain for the American Navy had blinded him to the true capabilities of his adversary. By the end of the war, the cumulative effect of relentless Liberty ship production, combined with the bravery of sailors and the coordination of Allied operations, had rendered the German U-boat campaign largely ineffective. The Atlantic, once dominated by stealth and fear, had been reclaimed through determination, innovation, and sheer numbers. Hitler's mockery, once so confident and scornful, had been answered by an unstoppable, unrelenting force of production and perseverance. In reflecting on the broader legacy of the Liberty ships, it becomes clear that their significance extended far beyond the war itself. They represented the ability of ordinary individuals, working collectively within an organized industrial framework, to shape global events. They demonstrated that logistical superiority, sustained over time, could determine the outcome of strategic campaigns. They proved that courage, ingenuity, and resolve, whether on the shipyard's assembly lines or the stormy decks of the Atlantic, could triumph over mockery, intimidation, and even seemingly insurmountable danger. The Liberty ships were, in every sense, a manifestation of national will made tangible, a force that reshaped the course of history. Even decades later, the story of the Liberty ships resonates as a powerful lesson in the intersection of human endeavor and industrial capacity. They show that victory is not solely the domain of superior weaponry or brilliant tactics, but often lies in the persistence, coordination, and resolve of those willing to commit their skills, labor, and courage to a larger purpose. The Atlantic, once the proving ground of German naval supremacy, had been transformed into a corridor of triumph, sustained by ships that were simple, resilient, and endlessly produced. The legacy of the Liberty ships is therefore not merely historical. It is emblematic of what can be achieved when ingenuity, industry, and human courage converged. In the end, Hitler's mockery of the American Navy was met with a quiet, persistent, and undeniable answer. The Liberty ships had changed everything. They had transformed the strategic landscape of the Atlantic, ensured the sustenance of Allied operations, and demonstrated that the strength of a nation lies not only in its technology or tactics, but in its capacity to mobilize, organize, and endure. Through them, ordinary men and women, workers, sailors, and planners alike, left an extraordinary mark on history. The Atlantic, once a theater of fear and uncertainty, had been reclaimed, and the world witnessed the enduring power of human determination manifested in steel, courage, and unrelenting purpose. And so, the story of the Liberty ships stands as a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the indomitable will of a nation. It is a story of transformation, both of the ocean itself and of the people who dared to confront danger, mockery, and adversity. It is a story of triumph not through spectacle or show of force, but through persistence, collaboration, and the unwavering belief that the seemingly impossible can be achieved when a nation commits itself to a common purpose. Hitler's mockery may have set the stage, but the Liberty ships wrote the final chapter, changing the course of history and leaving an enduring legacy for generations to come.